This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, the Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I'm your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, is Adam Gardner.
What's up, cuboids?
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to give you a little roundup of some books I've read lately, and Adam is going to explore the question, how many birds do cats really kill? Meow.
That's right, Darren. Cats are major killers of birds, or so the story goes. I'd heard these numbers before and never really questioned them. But when I recently saw the sheer numbers of bird deaths supposedly caused by cats and how many birds each cat needed to kill for that to be true, I questioned whether those numbers really made sense. I suspected that numbers were more or less made up by whoever crunched those numbers, and so I wanted to delve into it and see what was really going on.
Even though this was partially covered in a segment I did years ago.
Yes, segment on wind turbines.
Yes, we're in a zero trust environment. That's the important thing here. Mm-hmm. Which is important. You should check things out.
There are a number of estimates around, but a more recent update to the numbers is in the billions. Yes, billions with a B. So let's look at what's behind that calculation. The analysis was done by researchers at the Migratory Bird Center at the Smithsonian Conservation Biology Institute. Well, nothing like a primary source, so I just read the study. It wasn't that long. So it refers to these killings as part of anthropogenic threats. So basically attributes these deaths to humans. We're responsible for cats. Basically, cats are not native species to many areas, including the US, Canada, and Australia. So those deaths can be attributed to us. This all seems a bit arbitrary, as there are surely many deaths every moment of every day in the wild from predators killing prey. Some that are invasive, some that are not. But are we able to single those out as being man-made? Okay, fine, maybe in some context, but let's just look at those numbers. The study estimates that free-ranging domestic cats kill 1.3 to 4 billion birds and 6.3 to 22.3 billion mammals annually. That is a lot of birds.
That's also a lot of mammals.
Yes. Oh, it's many more mammals. So before I go on with this study, I thought about my own cats and how many or how few birds they've killed. So by my cats, I'm thinking of cats me and my family owned growing up. So some were indoor cats, some were outdoor cats. My first family cat was Sammy. He went outside. If he ever killed a bird, I never saw it. So I'd assume his annual cat murder rate was low to nothing, probably single digits. Then there was Gus, my cousin's cat, who lived with us for a while. He was wild, a true predator. He had a reputation, at least in my family, for viciously killing birds. I started a tally at some point. Cats Gus killed, I had written on the wall. When he died, that count was only at 6. Granted, he may have killed many birds when I didn't see him do so, and probably many before he came and lived with our family. But my high-end estimate for birds that this guy viciously killed in a year is a dozen or two.
He's a predator.
Yes, right. He had that weird infravision thing and all that stuff, so he could use that.
Gus would hunt with a laser.
The birds didn't know to smear mud over themselves to hide themselves from him, so... Sorry, birds. You didn't figure it out like Arnie did, or whatever his character's name was. So other cats include Thomasina, Buster, Cinnamon, Luna, Oreo, Katniss, Tigro, and Fleur. They were all indoor cats since they were old enough to, kill things on their own. So I would estimate them as having killed approximately 0 birds a year. I also had Cracker. He lived outdoors near a barn for about a year before he was... he basically moved in and was an indoor cat when he lived with me. He was fed, but he probably hunted some things during that time. Did he kill many birds? Maybe, but probably not a ton. Cheese, another cat I had, was also an outdoor cat when I got him, but he was declawed and skinny and very hungry, so he probably didn't kill a lot of birds. So 12 cats, maybe 50 or so birds between them. To me, that's a high estimate. So it's 4 birds to a cat in a whole lifetime per year. It's less than half a bird. That's my estimate.
Which is
not
super high, but also a lot of gaps and information you don't have.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it may be higher, but even if it's 10 times higher, it's still not a very large number, right?
Well, how many cats are there?
There are a lot of cats.
Yeah.
So I don't think there are a billion cats in the US, but maybe there are more outdoor cats that I'm giving them credit for here. It's estimated that there are about 93.5 million cats in the US. And if they're anything like my cats, that would mean like 40 million a year. It wouldn't account for these billions. So that was my unscientific estimate, maybe way off.
Wait a second.
So if those 93.5 million cats killed like half a bird a year, which is the number I estimated for my own cats, then that number would be like 40 million.
Okay, because you said...
I'm just estimating based on that before we get into the real analysis.
Because you said even if it was 10 times more, I'm like, well 10 times more.
10 times more would be like 500 million, and that'd be close to... That'd be closer to the number. You're right. So that was my unscientific estimate. It may be way off.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see what the actual numbers are. So they developed a probability distribution of predation rates for U.S. cat population sizes. And they used these estimates based on predation data from 3 sources. The U.S. and Europe, and the U.S., Europe, and other temperate regions. So mostly Australia and New Zealand. And they estimate that cats in the U.S. annually kill between 1.3 and 4 billion birds. All right, let's see the math. So this is shown in some tables at the end of the paper. And the key number to consider is the bird predation rate per cat per year. So the number of birds killed by one cat in 1 year. We can extrapolate from that. It's very easy to get a number from that.
We'll use math.
Mm-hmm. So there's a range of numbers for the 3 categories. The number of cats isn't known precisely, but broken up into owned cats and unowned cats. The idea being that an owned cat is fed and often housed indoors, so the number of birds they kill would be much lower. And this is where my estimate comes from. All of my cats have been owned cats. Otherwise, they wouldn't be my cats. So I wouldn't be able to give you a number. So my estimate was half a bird per year. Theirs might be much higher, but, probably not something huge. So let's look at that rate. How many birds does a cat kill per year? So I ran these numbers up. The U.S. studies say between 24 and 51. U.S. and European studies say it's between 23 and 46. And those for all temperate areas are between 30 and 48. So these ranges are all more or less in the same ballpark, with a difference of only a bit more than double from the low to high estimates.
But all much higher than yours.
Oh, absolutely. And these aren't owned cats, right? Basically, every cat kills 2 to 4 birds a month. Seems high, but it's probably not high for a wild cat, which spends all its time outdoors and literally hunts for food. But,
as I mentioned, you got to eat something. Mm-hmm. So what's it going to be?
Yeah, it's that or small mammals, right?
Mm-hmm.
But what about a domestic cat, right? Have you ever found a dead bird in your yard? Well, I don't think that's probably that likely, but, the real source of this killing seems to be these unowned cats. I was trying to figure out how exactly you'd estimate how many animals a cat kills in a day. It's possible but complicated. The ways I was thinking were things like put a camera on the cat or follow it around a bit or something like that. The truth is a bit disturbing, but a lot simpler. They used either one stomach or scat samples. Scat meaning like super cat or something like that? No. Feces. It means feces.
Funny. So, super cat, that's what scat means.
Yeah. So if you find, dead cats and 1 in 10 cats have a bird in their stomach, then that's 0.1 birds per cat per stomach, which extrapolates to 36.5 birds per cat per year, right? Like that kind of math is pretty simple. You can't really argue with that methodology if you have access to a bunch of dead cats that you're cutting open.
Yeah, it's pretty clear if it's right there.
Yeah. And for feces, you're basically saying, okay, how often does a cat defecate? And if there's bird remains in these feces, then we can calculate from that how many birds the cat's going to kill in a year. So let's crunch some numbers. It isn't really clear exactly how they got the final numbers, but, they show formulas. It just wasn't really clear to me how they put that together. But basically, you do these 2 calculations, one for owned cats, one for unowned cats, which seems to be reasonable because they're going to be very different numbers. And I ask myself, how often do I see a dead bird that's been killed by a cat? Not that often. If my cat killed a mouse, I would see it. But a wild cat, I might not see it because they might not be in my neighborhood or around in a place where I particularly live.
And what about a thundercat?
Oh!
You don't see nothing. They bury those things quick.
Yeah. So the key question then becomes, how many cats are there? So, owned cats, to me, it's not that important a number, but it's in the ballpark of 84 million. This one is actually easier to calculate because you just ask people. People own the cats. You can do a sample. You can ask everybody. You can do all sorts of things like you would survey for anything. You can extrapolate from small numbers or whatever. It might not be perfect, but you'll get an idea of it. But unowned cats is actually something that's very hard to calculate because they're not owned by anybody. They're in the wild. They're usually in rural areas where there's less people.
It's so hard to get them to answer surveys.
Absolutely. They don't pick up their phones, I don't. They don't even come over. In the US, it's estimated that this number is between 30 and 80 million. That's a big gap, of course. So let's use the high estimate for unowned cats and assume that these are the high estimates for how many birds they killed. So 80 million cats killing 50 birds a year. That's high. 4 billion. So yeah, that's close to the high number that they gave. We don't even need to consider domestic cats in that equation.
Right.
And the low number, if let's say there's 30 million unknown cats and that they kill closer to 25 birds a year, well, it's in the ballpark of 750 million. And that's less than their low-end estimate of 1.3 billion, but it's comparable. Are these numbers accurate? Well, the cat numbers for domestic cats, owned cats, seem to be similar to those found elsewhere, so I don't really question those, but that's not really the factor that's important here. The big question is about the number of unowned or feral cats, and I saw some estimates like 70 million, so that 30 million number is indeed a low one, and the 80 million number is a high one. So I think the range is close to what other people are saying. Number of birds killed or found in stools or in cats' stomachs? Well, I kind of have to take that study's word for it. I read another study on Canadian cats, and the estimates were in the same general range of 24 to 64 birds killed annually by a cat. Those are actually higher than the ones used in the study. And the overall numbers for Canada were lower than the US because there's a lower estimate for number of feral cats in Canada. And they estimated 100 to 350 million birds killed by cats in Canada per year. Okay, so I decided to do this segment because these numbers seemed ridiculous and I wanted to debunk or disprove them. I assumed some of this was unknowable or guesswork and that these huge numbers that were often cited might be wrong, but frankly, I think the methodology seems sound. It may not be perfect, but I think the numbers are probably in that rather large range of 1 to 4 billion in the US. So this brings me to another question. Is that a lot? So these numbers are big, but how many birds are there even?
Yes, out of how many is a very important question to ask.
Yeah, so if cats killed 4 billion humans a year, it would be game over for us in a couple of years.
Game over, man. Game over.
But birds? Well, it's estimated that there are 10 to 20 billion individual birds in North America. So in the US, it's less than that. Even the low estimate of 1 billion is a pretty significant percentage of that total number of birds. So when I hear things like cats causing extinctions of some bird species or significant losses to bird populations, yeah, I think that's actually plausible. And birds aren't that short-lived, with some of the smaller birds, like hummingbirds, living up to 14 years in the wild. So I reluctantly accept that, yes, cats kill a lot of birds.
Which I think is an admirable conclusion because it goes against what your preferences were and what you thought it would
absolutely
be. Just as a note, when we talk about birds, chickens are birds.
Mm-hmm.
And I just looked it up. Adam only watched me look it up just in case. Humans kill 70 billion chickens a year. Wow. And of course, most of these are under horrible factory farm conditions. And so we're not counting these 70 billion chickens when we're talking about birds, just as a by the way.
No.
But it is a number, of course, that is far larger than the 4 billion that cats are killing.
Yeah, that's a lot of birds. So worse than birds are the mammals that cats kill. These are estimated to be between 6.3 and 22.3 billion a year based on similar methodology. So it's kind of what cats are good at, right? Let's consider the reason for which we have cats around is because they domesticated themselves to humans by hunting small rodents which live near stores of grain.
I thought they were cute.
Right. They evolved to be cute to make us tolerate them so that they could eat vermin. I think is kind of how that story goes. Agriculture went hand in hand with vermin, which then brought us cats. But in a natural environment, cats have to eat. And they are carnivores after all, and they have to eat something. So small mammals are likely just easier prey than birds. They can't easily fly away. Well, this wasn't the conclusion I was hoping for, but I reluctantly admit that it does indeed seem like cats are responsible for bird death in the billions in the US alone, with hundreds of millions of deaths in Canada every year. Indoor cats surely kill no birds, and owned outdoor cats who are well-fed probably aren't the biggest contributors to this, but feral cats and those living 100% outside in rural areas like farms do seem to kill in the range of 25 to 50 birds a year, a handful every month, which is enough to account for these massive numbers of bird deaths. What is one to do? If you're a cat owner, keep your cats fed and indoors when possible. That's kind of easy. If you're living in a rural area with outdoor cats, try to keep them spayed or neutered to keep the feral cat population down. If you're a cat, I understand you have to eat. I'm not going to guilt you for that, but, just eat the food that's in the bowl.
Right. Well, thanks, Adam. I think this was a great segment in terms of the structure, which is a bit different than what we usually go through, which is that you led us along the path of your personal understanding and then compared it to more objective facts. And I think this is just a good method in general because one could just look up the objective stuff, but if you think through what you would conclude on your own first and then compare it and be willing to change your mind, that's a great way to do, sort of the whole science and critical thinking thing we promote.
Yeah, I could have jumped to the end, but I really did kind of write that part of the segment out before I got to the punchline, so that try to be as authentic as possible.
Well, and it really shows how we model the world in certain ways, and sometimes we get clear data that indicates our model of the world is incorrect or needs to be updated. Along those lines, and just highlighting the complexity of any topic, when you said just eat what's in the bowl, like, well, what's in the bowl, though?
Chicken and duck. And
right. And so this is the out of how many and what are we thinking about? So it's very easy often to then compartmentalize, well, that's this thing over here and that thing over there. But like, well, wait a minute. Are animals dying to feed indoor cats?
Yes.
And then how many for those? And if you said there's, 80 million indoor cats, they're eating 3 times a day, once a day, whatever it is, depending on the cat, and some sort of mush, which may be, leftover pieces from the stuff humans are not consuming, or it's got to have at least some portion. So then you're thinking like, okay, well, what's the fraction of birds or this and that may be? All that to say is, I don't know if people are doing that calculation. I'm sure someone could.
Well, it's similar to the calculations you could do for a human, only a human is an omnivore that has a choice in the matter. A dog is as well, but, the human has a choice of what the dog is fed, but a cat is a carnivore. Like,
yes,
there's no flexibility. If you want the cat to be alive and thrive, you probably have to feed it some meat.
Cats are obligate carnivores, yes. Mm-hmm. Now, until we get, different sort of fake meats up and running. The interesting question to me is the suffering that an animal in the wild might experience from a cat killing it in its so-called natural environment seems terrible and bad compared to the suffering an animal might experience to go into cat food, which I have no idea how that is or what that process is. I mean, they're both going to be some level of suffering, and I'm not sure what's worse or better.
Mm-hmm. And it depends on what your concern is. If your concern is just animal deaths, yes, cats existing are going to cause the death of some animals. If you're concerned about like the impact to like wild bird species populations and things like that, then that's a very different issue.
True.
Which
yes.
Cats seem to be contributing to.
And it's much easier to get people to be concerned about it. That's the other thing, right?
Sure.
It's like, I have a cat. I care about birds out there in the world, not the chicken I'm eating and giving a piece of to my cat.
Yeah, and I think overall, I enjoy cats and they bring joy into my life. Does having a huge sort of unmaintained feral cat population in North America bring much good to the world? I'm not sure. So neutering some of those cats and stuff is probably good for everybody.
Have your pet spayed or neutered, had goes what Bob Barker would say. Well, we're going down a rabbit hole here, but it's a decent question is there any upside to the feral cats killing all these mammals and birds?
Well, the enjoyment of the life lived of those feral cats, but they're an invasive species. Is that great for that ecosystem?
Yeah, well, when you said the enjoyment, like their retirement,
their lives matter.
I know. They're kept alive. Yes. Yeah. I was thinking more. Yes, the suffering of the animals is bad, but is there some sort of second order consequence where if there were too many rats or mice or who knows what, somehow causing some damage somewhere else, and that's where I wasn't sure, given what types of animals cats are eating out in the wild and what they may, interact in different ecosystems or elsewhere.
So if someone has a farm with a barn that is prone to get vermin, they probably have cats to control the population of vermin in that farm.
Yes.
So there's a function to
yes.
that, right?
Yes.
And that may be better than like fumigating the barn.
Yes. Well, if any listener has lots of experience with feral cats out in the world, please write in and let us know. Despite all these things that Adam said, I do find cats very cute, and I do spend a lot of time looking at them.
As do I.
I also spend a lot of time looking at books. So this segment is some quick reviews of some books I finished lately. 2 are on Israel and Palestine, 1 on military procurement, and 1 on freedom. Doing something a little bit different. For each book, I'm going to start with a summary paragraph from good old AI Copilot, and then my own summary words. So the first book, My Promised Land, The Triumph and Tragedy of Israel, by Ari Shavit. Copilot summary. Ari Shavit's My Promised Land offers a deeply personal and comprehensive history of Israel, exploring its founding, achievements, and ongoing challenges. Shavit combines historical documents, interviews, and his own family's story to provide a nuanced perspective on the nation's complex identity. He delves into the triumphs of Israel's innovative spirit and the tragedies of its conflicts, raising important questions about its future survival and moral dilemmas. The book captures the essence of a country living on the edge, balancing hope and despair, progress and conflict. AIs are getting so smart.
Yeah.
Now, my review, although the book is 10 years old, this part memoir, part biography with skilled analysis was excellent. The writing was top-notch and the narration was superb. It really had a lot of emotional effect. Both condemnatory and celebratory, the book makes a compelling contribution to understanding the ongoing conflict and the people involved. Ezra Klein thought highly of it, and I can see why. That said, it probably shouldn't be the first book you read on the subject because it doesn't provide as much background context as a more straightforward historical work would. So he'd be talking about something happened in, say, the early 1900s or even late 1800s. And like, yeah, this is a famous event. Or something in the 1920s and 30s. Like, oh yes, if you follow this, you know of this event already and you know people feel differently about it. And now you're getting a personal account, say, of his grandfather or something like that, perhaps living through the experience, which, again, if you had more context, it would be more informative.
Does he assume prior knowledge of these things, or does he present the context but you don't know that context is sort of
he gives you a little bit, but not that much, meaning he probably assumes you have some already, but he does at least give you a sense of how people felt or people might have felt on both sides during certain experiences.
Interesting.
And that I thought was very, very useful. As I sort of say, like, one should not confuse explanation with exculpation.
Yes.
But in the book, he is condemnatory, but he is trying to, I guess, be honest with himself about the nature of certain things. Well, he'll criticize Israel for doing certain things and say, but if they hadn't done that, I wouldn't exist and my family who I love wouldn't exist.
Yeah.
Which is a truth a lot of us might confirm. Like, oh wait, that thing led to this other thing, which led to me having like a child who I care about. And if that didn't exist, the whole thing doesn't work, right? But certain lines I really appreciated, say, when, say a grandfather is going through what became to be known as Palestine, he would just sort of say, like, how could they not see the villages that were already there?
Yeah.
They pretended not to see them. And that sort of language of, you're trying to understand how someone else may have consciously or subconsciously rationalized what they were doing and how they were doing it. Another example might be that even if, say, Jewish people were legally buying lots of land, that can still lead to understandable problems. If you think about where you live, whatever country you're in, pick the neighbor your people don't really like that much, and they're legally buying land, and then it just becomes part of their country. Like, whoa, that's a different type of thing. So, Canadians, Americans, we largely get along, of course, but there is some enmity and there's definitely some smugness on our part. But if some Americans were buying land in Canada and then it became America, you'd be like, wait a minute, what? That's a bit different, right?
Hard to fathom, but
well, even like, there's been a big issue in our West Coast of, say, people from China buying lots of real estate, but maybe not even living in it. And that affects prices and these sorts of things. So that's a reasonable concern someone who lives there might have. And that's not even like full like land ownership.
Yeah, there's no likelihood that boom, it becomes China.
No, and I'm not saying one shouldn't be able to legally buy land in that case. I'm just trying to highlight how even if things are done supposedly under that understanding of rule of law, it will understandably lead to other types of conflicts. Yeah. And again, the narration was really good where you're kind of taken along emotionally, but this should not be the only book and it should not be what's seen as a straightforward historical book, that's for sure. So then number 2, Enemies and Neighbors, Arabs and Jews in Palestine and Israel, 1917 to 2017 by Ian Black, was a bit of my follow-up so I could understand more, and this was a more straightforward historical book.
Would you have preferred to have read that one first if you had the foresight?
I think so. I mean, these are two like 500 to 600 page books. So they were both in audio, both kind of back to back. Maybe I should have spaced them out. It probably would have been better, yes, to have the Ian Black book first.
Because I read this one, but not the other one. So.
Right. The other way of looking at it is that the Ian Black book is harder.
Yes.
Meaning it's not as enjoyable to listen to.
Sure.
It's more effortful. While the other one, because it is, I said, memoir biography, it's a bunch of stories. And although they're, of course, historically informed stories by a journalist who's done research, it's a lot easier because people like stories. So first, the co-pilot summary of Enemies and Neighbors. This comprehensive book offers a detailed history of the Arab-Zionist conflict from 1917 to 2017, starting with the Balfour Declaration and the early Zionist settlers' arrival in Palestine. Ian Black, a veteran journalist, draws on a wide range of sources, including declassified documents and oral histories, to explore key events such as the Arab Rebellion of the 1930s, the Holocaust, the 1948 War, the Six-Day War, the Intifadas, and various peace negotiations. The book provides a balanced perspective on the ongoing conflict, highlighting the deep-rooted tensions and the challenges of achieving a two-state solution. That's a good summary. And this one is mine. This lengthy history largely succeeds at providing key moments of the ongoing conflict in chronological order over a 100-year period, 1917 to 2017. I wish that there had been more analysis, but that would have made the book less descriptive in theme and even longer. It's hard to tell if this book was biased or not, beyond the sense that, of course, all things are a bit biased. Mm-hmm. And that issue itself highlights the key issue broadly. There are many different narratives held across, within, and between different peoples, and they often do not align. When seemingly basic facts are in dispute, it's no wonder that there is no progress on greater resolution. There was an example given where years ago, a group of Palestinians and a group of Israelis were trying to come together to come up with a neutral text to have in educational material. And like for younger kids, we'll put it that way. And they couldn't agree. They couldn't agree on some neutral statements that would describe the events that both sides thought were sufficiently appropriate. And when you can't even have that, you can just see like, oh man, this is not going to go away anytime soon. It's a very difficult, rough situation. Several larger meta points assert themselves. The first, heterogeneity in general, and how it makes any sort of larger agreements difficult. As I just mentioned, if people don't agree on basic facts, that's one thing. Broadly, again, different people, again, you could have a bunch of Israelis, and they won't agree with each other. And there's widespread disagreement amongst different peoples in different parts of the country, and how people feel about Benjamin Netanyahu, or how they feel about Hamas, or where they might live, and how they feel at different times. And you can even think about almost anything for yourself politically. Have you felt the exact same strength of political belief about the same people throughout your life, throughout the day? No, not necessarily. So when you're trying to understand it, you can see how complicated it is from the outside, and especially if, I say, I don't speak the languages and that sort of thing. B, oppressor-oppressed framing and how they aren't exclusive. So often, people might see the world through the lens of who is oppressed and who is the oppressor, and in various contexts that can be very clear. And in other ones, it's not clear at all. And certainly with so much of the conflict in this region, it usually people say, yeah, well, this only happened because of this thing that happened before that. Yep. And well, because of this thing that happened before that, because of this thing that happened before that. And then soon you're going back decades, and then soon you're going back a century, and then this and that. So it's not that there isn't any logic in this causal chain of events, but you can have the same people who were oppressed now doing the oppression and vice versa. And it's all a big mess. Just to, again, highlight things are not as simple as it's viscerally felt sometimes when you might read something in the news on one side of this conflict or the other.
I don't think many people think this situation is that simple. But yes, I guess we always try to simplify things.
Sure. Well, it certainly feels more simple when an obvious injustice occurs. Let's put it that way.
That's fair.
C, basic incentives of power for individuals that reduce progress or peace. This is not revolutionary. It's just the point that some people, if they're in power, say fighting a war, they don't experience repercussions or going to jail or getting evicted from their role and status and so on. And people who are in power sometimes have an incentive to stay in power, and they can do that by maintaining a war. And there's been lots of talk about that in one way or another. D, the meta point of illegality versus immorality. And this relates perhaps a bit to the point I made earlier about buying land legally. Well, what's illegal? What's immoral? Whose laws? By what time? Was it like legitimate in the broad sense? Like, well, these are the laws. The person signed the document. Did they really know what the document meant? Mm-hmm. Was it fair? Were they literate in the right sense? Could things ripple through time in a way that some person saw but some person didn't? Was that fair in that sense? Okay. And the broader one, which is not limited to this particular issue, but I was just thinking about this more the more you read about history and different conflicts. What makes a people? Yeah. And I don't have a simple answer there. The answer that I do have is you belong to a group if you identify with that group and they accept you as one of them. I'm not saying this is going to hold up in sort of quarter analysis. And again, there's no simple way to do it. And there's theses written on this and books written on this. But try to think of yourself like, well, why do you feel whatever it might be? Say you're American, say you're Canadian, or say you are someone who is left-leaning or right-leaning, whatever it is. Like, what makes that way? How would you describe the characteristics that lead to that? And it has to do something, of course, with people accepting you or not. I mean, you can say like, look, I'm part of this group. And I was like, no, you're not. Like, well, that's weird. Or alternatively, someone's like, you're part of us. You're like, no, I'm not. So I think both parties in the broad sense, you and then the group, kind of have to agree you're in the group. But as you know, there's a lot of different beliefs and people tend to split. And you have further subcategories. This is, the history of peoples. This is the history of religions. This is the history of political parties. So that also becomes a kind of interesting, just thought experiment of what makes a people, especially when people, you can talk about different, even Canadians, Americans, well, you look similar. You talk similar, you eat similar foods, you watch similar shows. Are you the same people? Well, in some ways, yes, in some ways, no. And now we're on to the third book, Unit X, How the Pentagon and Silicon Valley Are Transforming the Future of War. So the AI summary. So this book by Raj M. Shah and Christopher Kirchhoff provides an insider's look at the Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, also known as Unit X. This elite Pentagon unit was created to bridge the gap between Silicon Valley's cutting-edge technology and America's military needs. The authors detail how Unit X has fast-tracked the integration of advanced technologies, such as AI-powered drones and microsatellites, into the military arsenal, bypassing traditional bureaucratic hurdles. The book highlights the challenges and successes of fostering innovation within the Pentagon and underscores the urgent necessity of this collaboration in an era of rapid technological change and geopolitical competition. And now my little summary. It's no small achievement to make a book about military procurement engaging, but that's what Unit X did. Granted, one must have some interest in the issue and a larger importance of military capability to ensure the rules-based international order, but regardless, it will help the world make more sense when you see more of what happens behind the scenes. The book is the story of Pentagon's Defense Innovation Unit and how it came into existence, almost lost funding, and fought to keep itself alive at numerous points despite providing value. Innovation is desirable, but often not too much, not too often, and especially not when it takes power away from other people. This is where you kind of get to see how the sausage is made, and it's just brutal, right? Like, oh, we think this unit is important, we're going to have you work on it, and then the people in charge are flying to Washington almost every week to then talk with other people just to make sure they'll get funding to do the thing. The book also showed that U.S. military projects helped create American technological dominance in the world, as well as the Silicon Valley itself. But then they parted ways. The past decades have seen, broadly, U.S. military software capabilities fall far behind the private sector. This has put the safety and security of the country at risk. Unit X has helped correct that. The book's informative, especially about large systems and how they operate. There could have been more about the ethics or concerns about any or all of this, but that's perhaps for a different book. I try not to be too critical, saying like, oh, this book isn't about this other topic. I was like, it is related, but books can't be about all things, otherwise they're all equally infinitely long.
It'd just be one book.
That's what I'm saying.
Really big book.
There is only one book. The book, Adam. And finally, book number 4, On Freedom by Timothy Snyder. First little AI summary. In On Freedom, Timothy Snyder redefines the concept of freedom, moving beyond the traditional notion of simply being free from constraints. Snyder emphasizes positive freedom, the capacity to make independent choices aligned with personal values and achieve self-actualization. He argues that true freedom involves self-governance, spontaneity, mobility, access to reliable information, and solidarity. Snyder challenges the common perception of freedom in the United States as merely the absence of external constraints, advocating for a more empowering and collective understanding of liberty. The book underscores the importance of fostering a society that supports personal empowerment and democratic institutions. And now Darren's thoughts. A decent meditation and reflection on the nature of freedom, the difference between freedom from, for example, harm, and freedom to, for example, to gather, to express, to lead a healthy life, and other musings. On Freedom has 5 aspects of freedoms and is intended for an American audience. You can sort of tell how it's written, who it's for. Snyder is best when discussing historical events, as that's his specialty. But in other domains, his coverage felt more like assertions than rigorously backed statements. Perhaps I wanted more qualified assessments than minor lip service of the positives of some negative thing. It's like, oh yeah, this thing is decently okay, and a blah, 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 blah negative. Like, okay, well, at least you can acknowledge it, but it still seems imbalanced. Some of the attacks seem like straw manning, and this makes the work seem immature. On the other hand, many people don't hold deeper beliefs about various things, and they use poor rationales to justify their positions. So attacking those or highlighting various cruxes could have some value. It's hard to say how this should go. He does risk alienating a demographic that doesn't already agree with him. Right? It's like people are like, well, what do you mean? Blah, blah, blah. Like, well, yeah, but if he already agrees, then who cares? That kind of thing. That's how I've come to see if you're trying to be an educator. It's nice to reinforce things, but if you come off as not being as rigorous, it doesn't work. That said, it's hard to disagree with his main concerns. Healthcare is important. Climate change is real and requires attention. Democracy and democracies are under attack. And the large tech companies want to keep our attention, even if it harms us in the long run. Yes, This is so abundantly clear. And if you happen to be a Canadian reading about why healthcare in the United States could be better, you're like, yeah. And so, again, from the outside, there's more complexity, of course, but yeah. Snyder's prescriptions for more mental freedom are great. such as greater transparency about almost everything in the digital world, so we know what is happening and who we are interacting with, but likely hard to implement. For example, if a user was ever shown a false news story, he thought, well, maybe they should subsequently receive a notification correcting that misinformation. I think a person or a small group could likely come up with some maybe AI program that would do this, but the larger social media companies are not that incentivized to do so. As a counterpoint, there are community notes on the Twitter and the X, which does do something like this. But if you take it as he was prescribing it, I'm scrolling through my feed. I see some headline, which is, we're going to label as misinformation, even then who makes that determination? And then later I get a ping, a notification in the app or sent to my email like, by the way, this thing you read wasn't true. I think someone should explore this because you don't want to say something isn't viable from the get-go. But I am skeptical, we'll say, of the effectiveness of this approach.
Community Notes does something like that.
Yeah.
A tweet you interact, or so they don't call them tweets, whatever they call them now.
X's.
You interacted
Yes.
with in the past, 3 days ago, has this note added. And the problem is, I often don't remember. It's like, I need to reread it just to understand the context of what I thought. And then I may not have interacted with it because I thought it was true, but maybe I did.
Right.
So it's the idea is good. Maybe it needs some.
Yeah. Well, I'm definitely a fan of more exploration of different ways to deal with this because these social media platforms do spread misinformation, and that is a problem. And even Elon gets his own community notes, which he doesn't seem to like.
Yeah, no, that's fine. It's his system.
It is.
Yep. Working as intended.
Finally, Snyder encourages people to get involved, locally or globally. Common enough, but it bears repeating, so I liked it. Most people complain about the state of the world instead of actually doing something that could meaningfully affect change. Don't just do anything, though. Take the time to consider options and implications, then do something effective. So I'd be curious to hear what people think about whether the AI and Darren's summary are better than just the Darren summary. I think it's an interesting, not contrast, but contribution, where noticing how the AI writes it, it's almost never negative, right? And all those summaries, I don't think there was one criticism because that's not what they're going to do. Oh, the summary of your book said it sucked. Like, you're not going to get a, well, you might get many people have an issue with this. They might do one of those things, right?
Sure.
And sometimes you get summaries of comments on different videos or whatnot you're watching. But AI said nothing negative. Well, I was at least trying to say, yeah, every book has some negatives. That's just how it is. But I wouldn't necessarily give you the foundational context, which I think is better to have before I give you my 2 cents.
You could probably allow the AI to be critical. And I think it not being critical is probably something that they do intentionally.
That is true. So maybe that's a good experiment. So next time, if there is one, I'll do this again. Like, okay, please provide 3 criticisms of the book, and we'll see what it says, right? Mm-hmm. That sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Those are interesting books. Darren, if I could read one, which would you recommend?
Oh, that's a good question. Given I know you do a lot of audio, I would probably say Unit X or My Promised Land, because both of those are very well narrated. Again, the military procurement book, as ridiculous as it sounds, like, this is a good story. And it makes it seem like an interesting tale of how this unit is doing its thing. And that goes for a lot, right, compared to everything else. The On Freedom one, I did like it, and I do like Timothy Snyder, but it wasn't quite what I wanted most of the time. That said, I think people should reflect on it. I think perhaps because a bit of the content seemed less novel to me. Years ago, Amartya Sen wrote a book called Development as Freedom, or at least was very much promoting this with articles and talks and whatnot. And that through moving up a developmental ladder or having basic necessities, sanitation, healthcare, education, and so on, people get more freedom. Yeah. If you are less educated, you are less free because you're just less capable in the world. You can't think as clearly. But even your own thoughts, your own opportunities in that sense. Similarly, if your health state is this and that. And so yes, Timothy Snyder saying, if people have poor health, they're less free. This makes obvious sense to me because I've had some health issues. You're like, you are limited and constrained and you can't make as many moves in the world. There was also a great part of On Freedom where, now I can't remember the details, but picture something about the nature of happiness or the nature of freedom. And he quoted 15 to 20 famous people in history.
Wow.
Like, and this is what, this one of the early presidents said, and this is what a famous philosopher said, and this is what a famous, actor or activist said, and this is what a Buddhist person, and they all don't fully agree, of course, right? You're like, this famous person believes the nature of this thing is the opposite to this other famous, respected person. And you it's nice to get it all together. You're like, wait, that's opposite. That's different. That's this, that's that. And you're like, I guess I have to listen to all this. And like everything else, kind of make up your own mind of what seems to resonate best with you. Well, listeners, thanks for joining us once again. Adam talked to us about how cats are wonderful special creatures that never hurt anyone. And I talked to you about some books, about some relaxing subjects like the Middle East and freedom. Until next time, think better, act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter at TRC_podcast.
Takes.
Small mammals are likely just easier prey than birds. They don't fly, you know?
Yeah.
They're sitting ducks, but not ducks, because ducks are birds.
This is like, it's so funny, but I don't want you to say it because we're talking about killing animals. But it's such a funny comment. They're sitting ducks. Well, not ducks, like sitting mice. Well, they often run around, so they're not quite sitting. Actually, what's my point again? All right, so how about, is there a way to make the sitting ducks joke without it seeming terrible? And I don't think there is.
Not killing ducks. And
well,
but we kill much more.
Just a second.
Chickens.
They may be killing ducks, just not that many.
Oh, I don't know. You'd have to kill like a little duckling. A duck's too big. Sorry, birds. You didn't figure it out like Arnie did, or whatever his character's name was. Dutch.
Sorry.
It is Dutch.
Oh, I know. It took a second. Okay, just a second. How many chickens do humans kill each year?
Oh boy.
I think it's like 10. But
We're getting political.
do you want to guess what the number is?
Oh my god. In the world?
Globally, I guess.
100 billion.
70 billion.
With a B. With a B.
God. I was gonna say 10 billion, but maybe that's cows. Jesus Christ, 25 million chickens killed every day. How many? 300 chickens killed every second. Ooh. Gonna pull up my segment. Here we have the nice AI summary. Okay, I already read this.
Is it not nice?
That's so funny. Why are you confused, Darren? Well, you don't like it no more. Hey, what are you doing? Why are you doing this voice? So I'm saying this book is good. It's good stuff.
Do the Fred voice.
I think this book could have been better.
It's good. It's good walking.
Trying to make sure I read all those nice words. This seemed to have larger words than last one.
Because of the expansion of the universe, everything's a
That's fun.
bigger.
That is well said. That is great. That is so wonderfully dumb. I love it. I will steal it. That's so funny. Does this shirt look big? Well, given the expansion of the universe. I mean, it's going to happen sometimes.
The expansion of the universe.
It's gotta be.
Makes you look